Whatever you say, Mr. Director. Like that. I feel like it's Saturday Night Live. Yeah, right. I spent a whole day in front of a green screen. It fried my brain. No worries. This works. Suppose I want to get from here to the nearest Starbucks. I'll just ask my phone. Where's the nearest Starbucks? And there we are. Easy, right? Here we are. I still don't know. Stella! Hey, in fact, just storing all our data on the web takes about 30 nuclear power plants worth of energy. Nuclear. Me and George Bush. In fact, just storing our data in the web takes about 30 nuclear power plants worth of energy. Nuclear power plants. In fact, just storing all our data on the web takes as much energy as 30 nuclear power plants. 30 nuclear power plants worth of energy. 30 nuclear power plants. Nuclear power plants. In fact, just storing all our data on the web takes about 30 nuclear power plants worth of energy. Nuclear. Oh, shucks. Nuclear. It's my Texas background. Nuclear power plants. Did I do nuclear again? Nuclear. Nuclear. I'm ready for my election now. 30 nuclear power plants worth of energy. Yay! Okay. Sure. It's going to be quite a ride, so join me, won't you? It's going to be quite a ride, so join me, won't you? It's going to be quite a ride, so join me, won't you? It's going to be quite a ride, so join me, won't you? You're all clear, kid. Now let's move it. Let's go. Great shot, kid. That was 1 in a million. There you go. Those are the outtakes. Let's look at the real thing. Just to check, are you streaming this now, or do I need to do something special?
We're streaming.
You're streaming. Oh, cool. All right. So, hi, Mom. KQED, the local PBS station in the Bay Area, who has sponsored us over the last several months to create this filming and the teaser you'll see in a moment. We went out there with our Emmy Award-winning producer, who they hired, and his writer as well too, who they hired, and we pitched this project to corporate PBS. So we're still on this journey. It's a long process. Our hope is in the next few years we'll be able to get it greenlit so that we can put something on television, 5 hours or so, we hope. It is, the way to think of it is, think of Carl Sagan's Cosmos, but about computing. That's the direction we're headed. In addition to this, we also have books, book series, ebooks, all these kinds of things. Why are we doing this? You and I are behind the curtain of computing, and most of the world does not know what we do, nor how we do it. It looks like pure magic to them. And as we, in our society, slowly surrender to computing, we believe it's essential that the world listens and understands how this stuff works. So what you're about to see is the teaser we used to pitch this to corporate PBS.
It takes us to the farthest reaches of the universe and into the deepest recesses of the human brain. Places that exist only in our imagination. It's making it more and more difficult to see where man ends and machine begins. Computer technology, the invisible intelligence that is woven into the fabric of our lives. A new PBS series explores how computing is transforming the way we live, the way we work, the way we play. Irreversibly changing our world, and perhaps even what it means to be human. Our guide knows this world inside out. He helped invent it.
Hi, I'm Grady Booch, and I love computers. In fact, I built my first computer when I was 12 years old. We're so used to computers in our lives now, it's hard to remember just how revolutionary they were back then. They allowed us to do things that were literally out of this world. We made it all the way to the moon. Impossible without computing. But do you know what's just as amazing? This thing. We call it a smartphone, but I don't think we appreciate just how smart it really is. In fact, this little device has more computing power than all of the computers it took to put that man on the moon. That's right. I said more computing power. A lot more.
In fact, there are about as many transistors in this one device as there are stars in our galaxy. Billions upon billions of them.
Incredible power at our fingertips. And yet, computing has merged so seamlessly with our daily lives, we barely notice it anymore. And that's the thing. Almost everything computers are doing for us and to us is invisible. This thing may help me find my way around town, but it's also keeping track of every move I make.
We are, intentionally or not, surrendering ourselves to computer technology. The world has never been smaller. The possibilities never larger. But what happens when a world made of atoms is transformed into bits? What are the moral limits of war when machines do the dirty work? What do relationships mean when everyone in the crowd is blown? Will internet commerce create a surveillance state where nothing is forgotten and every action observed? Are robots our servants or our successors? And how is computing rewiring our brains? The future is here, the merging of man and machine that is shaping our destiny.
Join me, won't you, for Computing, the Human Experience.
Our premise is that the story of computing is the story of humanity, and both are filled with stories of incredible passion and drama and avarice and serendipity and wonder. And it's those things we wish to express in this series, so that behind the curtain, I am just in awe of the things that I see. I want to open the curtain and have people look at the things we do and be as equally in awe. Last year I had the opportunity at this very forum to give a lecture on the first episode on War and Peace. We originally envisioned 11 episodes, and it's unless you're doing something like the Housewives danced with the ice truck survivors, it's really hard to get that on TV. So it's compressed now to 5 episodes. We hope it'll stay at that place. And what you're about to see is a shortened version of one of the lectures we did at the Computer History Museum on one of those topics, namely man and machine. Attending to the issue, is the brain computable? This blows me away. Within this space, space that weighs about 3 pounds, consumes the energy of a 100-watt light bulb. Within that space, the command of every king, the hope of every peasant, the tear of every lover has emanated from this palace. And yet there is an incredible mystery of how mind emerges from that matter. That has been an enduring mystery for us. Where does sentience begin? I know that I'm sentient. I think that you're sentient. It'll be difficult for you to prove. But it's also curious that even though across life in our world, the components of life across the universe appear to be abundant, but the components of sentience appear to be very rare. Indeed, we sentient beings may be the only sentient beings in this universe. We do not know. And yet in this spectrum, we know that a slug can't write a sonnet, but an elephant will mourn its dead mate. A porpoise can look in a mirror and identify itself. A chimpanzee can lie to another chimp. And we humans laugh. Where does sentience begin? There's this great scene in Star Trek The Next Generation.
What is required for sentience?
Intelligence, self-awareness, consciousness.
Prove to the court that I am sentient.
This is absurd. We all know you're sentient.
So I am sentient, but Commander Data is not.
That's right.
Well,
This is the problem of other minds, in that we know, but it is difficult for you to prove to me that you know. And so this notion of what is sentient or not becomes a very slippery topic, both in terms of where the line is drawn and the consequences depending upon what side of that line we are on. It's tantalizing, though, that as we look at the structure of the brain, some 100 billion neurons in it, it appears that at the neural level, they act very much digitally. There are certainly some interesting things with regards to the signals passing back and forth. It's kind of an on and off, although there's some time-dependent behavior associated with them. But at the base of the mind, base of the brain, it appears to be indeed digital. If you combine these neurons into larger structures, you find the structures of the mind begin to form. And another tantalizing thing that we've realized is that if I stimulate a part of the brain, then I, in my sentient state, may smell, feel, taste, dream something. And similarly, if I look at the active human brain and I see it in motion through MRIs or whatever, I can see that something's going on there when you feel, taste, and touch. The conclusion is that there is some connection between brain states and mental states, which leads us to ask the question, how much sentience can we build from silicon and software? I think it tells us a great deal about us, that the notion of trying to build sentient things has been throughout our literature and our mythology, from the golem of Jewish mythology to Da Vinci's knight to the Kenshiro robot that we see today. And yet this appears to be a reflection of both our hopes and our fears. One of the other premises of our series is that computing has arisen because of human need. And so part of what drives us appears to be this hope that we can build things that are our helpmates, our assistants, maybe even our friends. But at the same time, we also worry about what we fear. And as you go down the path of being able to build these sentient creatures, we have to ask ourselves, can they turn against us? And this is a common theme in literature and movies. Where does sentience begin? And is it possible to define the seat of sentience? There are some that say sentience is outside of science, that the notion of consciousness is out there somewhere and we will never understand it. It's one reasonable point of view that some hold. Descartes, the gentleman who said, "I think, therefore I am," suggested that the seat of the consciousness is in the pineal gland. And his observation was, this is a very special part of the brain that allows the physical body to communicate with the spiritual. That's where he believed the seat of consciousness to be. Whether or not you believe it is
Any worlds, there have always been.
Quiet. I'm not ready for you, Guinan. Whether or not you believe it is the essence of the manifestation of our hopes, or the manifestation of our fears, or we'll never get there, whether or not you believe the mind is sentient, the mind is computable, it still leads us with some profoundly difficult ethical questions. The fears and hopes are more of how do we relate to this technology out there? What might it do to us? There's another way of looking at it, as Guinan describes, also from Star Trek, in which he's talking about how should we treat sentient beings like data.
Many worlds, there have always been disposable creatures. They do the dirty work. They do the work that no one else wants to do because it's too difficult or too hazardous. And an army of data is all disposable. You don't have to think about their welfare. You don't think about how they feel. Whole generations of disposable people.
There have actually been a quick aside, because I didn't do this in the lecture, but you're all geeks. There's been some interesting studies I've run across in the last week in which there have been psychological studies of people observing a toy robot, being destroyed and seeing the emotional reactions to it. We bond with these devices. And so what Guinan is addressing is, what should our relationship be to these entities that we know we programmed? But yet, you say, isn't it the case these things are just programmed, they're fully deterministic, and they only do what we tell them to do? This is the perspective that Joseph Campbell, the beautiful, wonderful mythologist, has expressed. I think he's talking about Windows, I think in particular. But he says, computers are like Old Testament gods, full of rules and no mercy. They do exactly what we tell them to do. But you and I know, as we're behind the curtain, you and I know that we can build simple systems that combine with other systems that have this astonishing complexity associated with them. Complexity such that they can begin to mimic human behavior, such as what we see in the Asmo robot coming from Honda. Interesting scene here in which you have a squadron of Asmos meeting people at the front door. Facial recognition tells them who they are, and the Asmos are directing them to one place or another. So they're not fully, we don't know exactly what they're going to do. It's not totally deterministic in that sense, but boy, do they look human-like. That looks a little creepy to us to some degree, but, oops, we went too far. Oh, hang on, I'm not ready for you. Let's try you again. There we go. Yes. A little creepy to me, but then I didn't grow up in Japan, and I'm not a Shintoist. Because in the Shinto belief system, there is the acceptance, the embracing of the notion that inanimate objects may indeed have spirit. Is it possible to have inanimate objects that do indeed embody the spirit? Can we build entities that can think and can feel and can plan and have goals and have choice? Or can they even get to the illusion of that? The answer is yes.
Please let go of my arm. You are hurting me. Why did you do that for? It's hurt.
So we see a sense or an illusion of choice in this entity, and yet we know we programmed it. The journey to these artificial intelligences, the journey of AI, has been a wild one. There were periods prior to the AI winter of irrational exuberance. We thought it was just over the horizon, if we just had better and faster machines, and if we just understood this and that. But there was also disappointment along the way. We learned a variety of things that said, it's much harder than we realized. No surprise there, it's taken evolution, hundreds of thousands of years to bring us where we are. This is Ed Feigenbaum of Stanford, who is one of the key figures in artificial intelligence from sort of the renaissance of AI, the knowledge engineering period, and he put it this way.
Manifest destiny of computer science. That is the end of the road.
That's the goal. AI is the goal. I love how he has his metaphor as the manifest destiny, because we're out there in the wild, totally unexplored territory. And yet, over the years, we have tried a number of paths. I think failure is good, because it tells us things that don't work, which can focus us upon other places. Now, in the expanded version of this lecture, I would go into each of these but I'm going to kind of reduce this to about 3 of these periods. As you look at the history of the evolution of moving from silicon and software to sentience, there are these periods that I seem to have identified. The earliest period was that of the cybernetics time frame. Norbert Wiener and the like, the creation of these interesting little tortoises from George Walter. And this was the time in which we were looking at models of animal mechanisms to see how it might lead us. And clearly there were limitations. The next stage was that of symbolic processing. And so you had things like the shaky robot, you had the blocks world, you had Elijah as well during that time. Shaky is actually sort of what got me in this business. You may have heard the story about me and John Backus in this morning's thing. There was also this great article in Life magazine around the same time frame talking about Shaky, and Marvin Minsky was in it. And I knew then this is what I wanted to be doing, absolutely. Yet there are some curious things that happened in this stage. The AI community was able to go to a certain distance, indeed to a distance that fooled a lot of people. There was a very simple system called Elijah that acted as a Rogerian therapist. It would say things to it, it would ask back, and it really had no intelligence whatsoever. But what was striking is the way that people would react to it. They would begin to enter these conversations that they would just bare their souls on because they thought they were talking to some sentient, sympathetic being. We know that wasn't the truth. This was the beginning of the end of the start of AI, the beginning of the AI winter. And I think the nail in the coffin was placed by Herbert Dreyfus, currently at Berkeley, who had a resounding condemnation of the approaches at that time. The approaches were largely symbolic because it said, gee, intelligence is equivalent to symbolic manipulation. So why don't we see if we can do symbolic manipulation in interesting ways? He went on to say that no, it's much harder than that. In fact, he had these things here that he said that the assumptions AI is making are fundamentally flawed. The brain is not exactly digital. He was precise, but as it turns out, not exactly right. The brain is a bit more digital than we expected. The brain is also not really a symbol processor. And I think what we're learning is that symbol manipulation is more of an emergent behavior, theme we'll see in a moment. Another condemnation around this time was presented by John Searle in his so-called Chinese room experiment. He posited it like this. Suppose I have a closed room, and in one side I put in Chinese writing, and on the other side you get a translation of it, and on the inside I've got a person who has this book of rules, and it has rules for everything. So if I feed something in, it goes out and out to the other end. And we're seeing clearly a translation, which is a behavior of intelligence, he believed. And yet he said the man certainly doesn't understand what's going on, and yet maybe he's doing the wrong thing here. Searle was right in one way, that there's no understanding in that person, but that's sort of like saying the CPU has no understanding. What we've observed from a further look of this is that really it's the system that understands. This kind of ties into what Tim was talking about earlier. He has this vision of really this brain in the web, and it's not because any one piece knows it's alive and sentient, but it's a thing as a whole. That's kind of that thinking. We're now in a different stage, and as you look at contemporary AI, and Watson is a wonderful example of it, we've moved from pure symbolic processing to one that is far more probabilistic in nature. This is a conversation I had with Watson a couple of years ago.
So Watson, in the category Gravity's Rainbow, this scientist said that he understood how it behaved, but not how it worked. Watson? Who is Sir Isaac Newton? Correct. Now Watson, we've seen from Mr. Shepard's presentation how you behave. Would you be willing to explain to us how you work?
I'm sorry, Grady. I'm afraid I can't do that.
From the line of 2001. That was a staged conversation, but one of the remarkable things about Watson, and I think it's a major milestone, is that through that experimentation and research, we've been able to establish an architecture that allows us to attend to ambiguous, contradictory, incomplete information, much of what intelligence must do. Is Watson sentient? No. Does Watson understand? not really, but yet I can begin to have a conversation with Watson. That's the direction that Watson's architecture is being taken. So Watson is beginning to achieve this illusion of conversational intelligence. Yet you and I know there's no magic there. As we rip open the curtain behind it, we know that Watson is simply pretty cool inside. The way it works is a pipe and filter architecture. And again, I'm getting geeky for you guys. I wouldn't do this in the PBS series, but it's a pipe and filter architecture built on a thing called UEMA. And the filters are all these little bits of processing that do various attempts at natural language programming. So what happens is that you get something in the front of Watson. It expands out into some 10,000 different hypotheses. That's the forward chaining. And then Watson goes back and says, let me find evidence that supports these. It expands out to several 100,000 different things. And then Watson collapses it again into probabilities. I think this is more likely than this one, and that's how you get it at the end. And of course, Watson does it very quickly. From the time that I were to drop this on the floor, Watson would have done all that. We did so by throwing hardware at it. That's where Watson is today. And I think it's a remarkable milestone in artificial intelligence. What's the next step? The next step is as we begin to explore this confluence of what we know about the brain and what we can do in silicon and software. I think it's best expressed by the ideas of Marvin Minsky in his ideas of society of mind. I'll let him describe it in his words.
When we make machines that have these multiple levels of organization, we'll find that if the machine if we manage to make it have the same sort of structure that the human brain has, we don't know enough about that yet to do it, then it will...
I love what he said. We don't know yet enough about that to do it. We're on an interesting cusp, as we shall see in a moment. What Minsky is basically saying is that this behavior is something that emerges, much like you see a flock of birds. I can't sort of predestine it, but if I put the right simple things that work together in interesting ways, then it produces this behavior that emerges from the outside. Another thing that's happened is that we realize, and Rodney Brooks has made this point, is that the notion of a disembodied intelligence is probably the wrong way to go. And so what Rodney Brooks is telling us is that you need to have a body with this thing. Our mind emerged with interacting with the outside world, and so there are some things we can do with the disembodied mind, but wouldn't it be much better if we had to have a system that interacted with the world? Thus, he had this series of interesting robots. Kismet was one of them, an emotional robot that interacted with humans. He had further ones after that, Koss and the like. And you'll see one of his other robots later on. So let's see what we've done here. We know some architectures for basic ambiguity processing. We have some ideas of society of mind. Let's add an embodiment to it. Well, it's begun to lead us to things like this. We know that what's up there on Mars right now is semi-autonomous. Is it sentient? By no means, and yet it does things that we would certainly consider intelligent to some degree. That's my view of the world. My premise, which I respect is not the only premise, is that the mind is computable. I firmly believe in that. I have no issues with it. There are others, like my wife, who tell me I'm wrong, and I respect that point of view. There are others, such as Penrose, who suggest, no, the mind is not computable. It's doing things that are beyond computation, and this is how he sees it.
Mathematical understanding. Mathematical understanding depends upon consciousness. But mathematical understanding is not something of a purely computational character. There is something else which has to come into that. So the mathematics only comes in to demonstrate that there is some part of our conscious thinking which you cannot simulate on a computer.
What Roger Penrose is saying is that he believes, and he's a physicist, a mathematician, he believes that consciousness arises for something, that something happens down at the quantum level. And he has one point of view. There are others who take the point of view that no, that's not going to happen. I'll get geeky with you for a moment. That the things he's talking about happen in a time frame such that the wavefront would collapse too fast to achieve sentience. So there are those that believe it physically is impossible to be a violation of the laws of our universe. but we're on an interesting path now. And so this is the next frontier. I respect those other views, but this is the thing coming in the mix right now that I think will lead to our next step forward in building sentience from silicon and software. This is the State of the Union.
And the most powerful computer in the world isn't nearly as intuitive as the one we're born with. There's this enormous mystery waiting to be unlocked. The BRAIN Initiative will change that by giving scientists the tools they need to get a dynamic picture of the brain in action and better understand how we think and how we learn and how we remember.
So why is this important? Why is having a map of the brain important? Right now, the analogy I use is the level at which we're trying to understand the brain is much like putting a test probe on a router somewhere in Kansas and inferring from that how Google works. We just don't know enough. And so the intent of this project is to map the brain completely. But by the way, we in the U.S. are already behind the power curve here. This was announced at the State of the Union. Yes, there are some activities going on, but there's been a project in the EU that's been going on for much longer, much more well-funded than we are, to try to build this map. And not just a map, but there's also a push to build a complete simulation at the neural level and see what we learn from it. You talk about big data, you ain't seen nothing yet. People often compare this to the Human Genome Project. And in the Human Genome Project, we're talking about 8 billion base pairs, which is, that we eat that stuff for breakfast at IBM these days. And yet, if you take a look at the brain state, we're talking about orders of magnitude more information captured there. So just the research project alone is going to generate petabytes upon petabytes of information. So that's the new frontier. Can we build sentient machines from silicon and software? We're in an exciting phase right now because we know enough to be dangerous in some ways. Is this going to manifest itself to what we fear or what we hope? Are the robots really going to take over? They already have. They already have. Anytime you've ever been on try to get customer support, you've invariably talked to some machine. And now we have devices that can listen to your voice and see if you're upset or frustrated or about to, commit some heinous act against that device. We can sense those emotions. That normally is something that would require intelligence on our part. We see also, as you check into various places, you're interacting with some entity here that normally required a human. We've got these little devices running around our rooms, the Roombas. We even have Siri.
Read me the message.
New message from Sebastian. Great news. We got the go-ahead.
Now, what's striking about each of these, did you notice there are no other people here? What's happening is that people are we're creating this such that people no longer need people. And that has tremendous economic consequences. Foxconn recently announced that they're going to eliminate about 1 million entry-level jobs because they're using computers. So in this journey toward building machines that are sentient, whether or not we get there, there are economic consequences because we're doing things that replace activity that was normally intelligent and replacing a lot of things that, frankly, not just entry-level people used to do, but the middle class used to do. So I firmly believe that one of the reasons for the current economic malaise and the reason that those kinds of jobs aren't coming back is that those jobs simply don't exist anymore. And it's not just that. We see it in places like every time you go to a movie. Unless you're a Cecil B. DeMille, you don't hire hundreds of thousands of actors. You use a system called Massive from New Zealand. Every one of these is generated as an agent-based system. So there might be 1 or 2 humans involved, but every other thing you see here is a small AI interacting with it. We see this in our factories as well. Look at an Amazon factory. Look at this one. This is a robot that comes from Rodney Brook. And what's interesting about this robot is it has a degree of common sense. It knows if something can be wet or not. And it learns along the way. Plus there's some eye candy. Notice the little Etch-a-Sketch-like thing in the front of it with the eyes. The robot does not need it, but it's there simply to make us comfortable with that particular robot. And then, of course, there's the Google automated car. What's fascinating for me about this is that The Google car is pretty much what Brooks would call a subsumption architecture. Behaviors built upon behaviors built upon behaviors. And it's allowing us to build systems that sense the world, never really have a model of the world, and even let people who are blind drive the car. Now, we talked about the economic consequences. There are some other consequences. What are the moral and legal responsibilities? What if there is an accident? Who's responsible? The car owner, the car programmer, who knows? It's raising all sorts of these kinds of issues. Now, in this journey we are on, I am convinced that it is inevitable. We are on a path that is going to lead us to discovery. It is also a journey that is irreversible. Some of these things may be suppressed, we may see laws against them, but the problem is, with this kind of technology, the genie is out of the bottle. And also the consequences are truly going to be immeasurable. It asks us the question, what does it mean to be human? These were dancers, and if you saw the whole video, you'd see this entity in the front just dancing along with the other ones until you looked really close and you realized it's not a person. This explains Justin Bieber. So, Justin, are you sentient? I don't know. Descartes used the phrase, I think, therefore I am. Maybe the right phrase we should ask ourselves, I dream, therefore I become. You and I dream. Can a robot dream? Well, we know there's a story about that. Do androids dream of electric sheep? However, there are some that will claim that consciousness is an illusion and even dreaming is an illusion. Because what dreams are, the way your mind is defragmenting your brain or vice versa, and it's a matter of taking patterns and projecting them into the future. We know how to do that. So even this palace of dreams that we have in this one space, we may turn them into a place that's silicon and software. It's inevitable, it is irreversible, the changes are immeasurable, and so it causes me to ask you, in the presence of all this, what does it mean to be human, and how shall we live? There you go. Fade to black. Thank you very much.